Michigan's Attorney General has officially brought charges against the self-proclaimed leader of a white supremacy group called The Base. 25-year-old Justin Watkins and 35-year-old Alfred Gorman attempted to target the home of a podcaster in 2019 who was critical of neo-Nazis, but they allegedly terrorized a different family after getting the address wrong for the podcaster. Earlier on CBSN AM, I spoke to former Secret Service agent Charles Marino about the charges the two are facing and why it took so long to have them arrested.
This is many of the tactics that these groups use through fear and intimidation. Recently, the Department of Homeland Security, in consultation with the FBI and the rest of the intelligence community, in a recent threat assessment, identified white supremacy as our #1 threat here domestically in the United States. So it's about time we start taking these militia groups, right-wing militia groups, white supremacy groups, a lot more serious than we have been in the past. What I can tell you is that these groups are not only is their belief that obviously the white race is superior, not only in this country, but around the world. But they have disdain and hate, not only for minority groups within this country and around the world, but also against the United States government, for which they blame many of what their perceived implications are against the white race here in terms of government programs for minorities, et cetera. So there's a long history and story here about their hate and these groups, and it's time to now focus. We're almost looking at not so much just militia and white supremacy groups here, but the way that they act and the skills, the capabilities, the organizational structure of these groups really makes them mirror more of an insurgency where groups are against the government and want to roll them over.
I think that's really interesting. When I was reading the details of this case, I thought to myself, yeah, on one level, they're sort of like the gang that can't shoot straight because they get the address wrong and, post it on the internet. And then even after they realize they have the address wrong, and they're sort of like, well, anyways, we still sort of, mission accomplished anyways, because people will still be sort of frightened or intimidated. But then on the other hand, as I continued to read, what I saw was an organization that was spread out over many states, and I thought to myself, it reminds me a little bit of organized crime. Now, the charge that these two men are facing that holds kind of the most time in jail is gang membership, 20 years. Are these groups operating more like an organized crime ring than we have actually been giving them credit for?
Yeah, let's talk about the charges and kind of how this case was brought and what charges this group faces. Like you said, it was a year ago in this particular case. Why now? Well, I think the answer is pretty clear, and that is based on what the attempted plot to kidnap and possibly kill the governor of Michigan by the Wolverine Watchmen, a local militia group in the Michigan area. So essentially, the heat is now on, especially in Michigan. Michigan is one of the top 5 locations where militias are present and operate. So it does not surprise me at this time that law enforcement action was taken against these members of the base. It could have been for a number of reasons, right? It could have been because there was another imminent threat that we didn't know about. It could be that law enforcement wanted to gather more intelligence on the group. So there's a host of reasons why actions could have been taken against this group now as opposed to a year ago. So let's just keep that in mind. And the more intelligence we can get on these groups, the better. As far as the nationalization of these groups, that's the wild card for these groups. While they do have what they purport as a national framework, they are still broken down by region and by state. And with that, you have different ideologies that may vary slightly. So what one militia may think in one state might be government overreach, another militia in another state may not. And that's the wild card in terms of when these groups may take action.
Both of these men are relatively young, the ones that were arrested. How is someone this young, how do they become radicalized in this way? How does it work?
Yeah. So radicalization is an interesting path. Some have longer to go in the radicalization process than others. What we do see in many of these folks that join these groups is we see impacts that have previously contributed to their beliefs where they are now. And that is racism in the household when they were younger, anti-government sentiment. They may have had a trauma situation when they were younger. There's something that makes them predisposed to be more open to the radicalization process. And we see that not only here, we also see it with other groups and terrorist organizations around the world. So they're predisposed to have this belief. However, there are a percentage of people that are being exposed to this belief system initially and have a long way to go in the radicalization process. That's where the recruitment capabilities of these groups has really mirrored what's going on in the world in terms of use of social media, the internet, recruitment drives, organizational events within communities.
Apparently, they were also, they created a hate camp on nearly 4 acres of property. Once again, it's easy to sort of dismiss it as, a bunch of guys running around in the forest, on a camping holiday. But what's really happening here? And when you hear about this sort of stuff, how concerned are you?
Well, I'm very concerned because, in the 5 locations across the country, which we brought up Michigan, but you're talking about Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Oregon, and then another subset of groups just below that have moderate risk for militia activity. It's concerning because obviously these groups in those states feel like they can operate, and they can operate a little more overtly than what they normally have, especially since these groups are now more politically aligned to the right, which we know to be a fact. So the fact that local law enforcement, state law enforcement is not taking action and hasn't taken action against these groups because of what they deem to be concerns with the law, right? First Amendment practices, Second Amendment practices. I think we need to realign all of these beliefs and start taking action against these groups. And as you saw in the case with the base in Michigan, the charges can be, there's a wide variety of options in which you can go after these groups.
We've seen the activity, an uptick in the activity of these groups over, the last 4 years, quite frankly, over the period of time that Donald Trump has been in the White House. No matter what happens with the election, what is your expectation when it comes to activities in these groups? Do you think it'll continue to go up or sort of start to diminish?
The number one concern for me with the militia groups and white supremacy groups is the fact that there has not been a national voice from the level of the president to say, stand down and don't do anything here as it relates to the election. Do not commit violence. None of this will be tolerated. We need that from both political parties, but especially since these groups are now politically aligned from the right, the message needs to come down very strong from the president that whatever actions these groups are planning on taking, whatever disruptions they want to do, fear, intimidation against voters, whatever form it takes, it will not be tolerated and they will be held accountable. My other concern is the fact that the nation is divided right now. That's apparent. And the election is the ideal event that could possibly serve as a flashpoint. As elections go, you and I both know you can't please all the people all the time, and there will be people upset by the outcome, whatever that is. What does that look like on the streets of the major cities in this country? That's the big question. Law enforcement's being prepared. I think all of us are on the same page in terms of the higher possibility than in elections past of the cases of violence that may take place. I think we saw a preview of that, even though it was the result of in-custody police deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. I think that kind of gave us a flavor in terms of what these types of protests may look like in the major cities of this country.
Charles Marino, thank you so much.
Thank you.